Hi, everybody. We are live. Welcome to our new Facebook Friday series. Tonight, we are really excited to have Scott Turow and Mark Pryor with us. We were supposed to be doing the event in store, so we're really glad that we can do it this way virtually. So for you guys, for those of you who don't know, Mark is the author of the Hugo Marston series. The first is The Bookseller. He is going to be chatting with Scott Turow. Scott just released his new book, The Last Trial, which we have some signed copies of at the store. So if you guys have any questions, just put them in the Facebook comments below. I'll be feeding them to Mark. We'll leave some time at the end to get to some of your questions. So Mark, I'm going to turn it over to you, and I will see you guys in a little bit.
Thank you. Thank you, John. Scott, welcome. Hello.
Thank you.
I have to let everybody know who's watching that you're kind of one of my heroes. I read 1L before going to law school, and it almost changed my mind.
Yes, well, you know, if you read 1L and went, then that's your fault. So,
yeah, buyer beware. Well, welcome. How are you doing?
Well, thank you. Really good. You know.
Yeah, one thing I'm curious about that a lot of my writer friends and I are talking about right now. I'd be curious to know what your writing process is generally and how it's been affected by this funny thing called Corona.
I've been really startled by how flattened my writing process has been by the coronavirus. I've compared it in an analogy that dates me to, it's like somebody is playing a scratchy record next door, you know, and either it skips or repeats, and either way, it's going to drive you out of your mind. And there's just a high level of distraction. I do what a lot of people think is stupid and look at, you know, virus statistics from all over the US. Any place there's somebody lives that I love, I try to keep track of what's happening. Then if you look hard enough, there's bad news to be found. So, and I guess that's what's grinding away. But you know, we're going to go back to the Midwest this week. I'm down in Florida, and I'm going to do what we all have to do, which is just put a seatbelt on my chair and make myself work.
Yeah, that's worked for me. I found that writing was difficult, but I was able to read a bit. Are you reading at all?
Yeah, I'm reading more, I think. Although even that process, I think I'm less engaged. So, you know, nothing really is truly floating my boat. I find myself, you know, maybe too critical or too quick to back off and disbelieve. I don't know.
Yeah.
You know, it's a very weird time and a time of considerable anxiety for all of us. You know, even though now I can say that, you know, I'm safe, Adrian's safe, our kids are safe, our grandkids are safe. But, you know, there's plenty to worry about for everyone.
Yes, there is. And let's distract everybody who's watching by talking about books for a little while. Specifically, this new book, what was the inspiration? What was the idea for that?
Well, Sandy Stern, who people who read Presumed Innocent or saw the movie, they'll remember Sandy Stern as the character played by Raul Julia. He was Rusty Savage's defense lawyer in Presumed Innocent. And, you know, Stern happened about halfway through the book, and I fell in love with him and became the, you know, the hero, as it were, of my second novel. And he's made an appearance, usually in the background, in every novel since then. And his last sort of major appearance was in Innocent, a book I published in 2010, where he was Rusty's defense lawyer again. And in Innocent, for reasons that I can no longer fathom, except I guess I thought Sandy was getting old, he had advanced metastatic cancer, and he looked a wreck. His clothes gapped on him. He had a horrible rash on the side of his face as a side effect from one of the forms of chemotherapy. And readers who've followed my work wrote in numbers saying, "Oh, say that Sandy Stern isn't going to die." And I instinctively said, well, no, he's not going to die. But, you know, as I wrote my last novel, Testimony, where Stern, per usual, appears in, one paragraph in the book, I said, how is it that a guy with, advanced metastatic, non-small cell lung cancer, how's he in such good shape that he's going to parties? And I said, well, maybe he's got, one of these super drug therapies or something. And I started poking around with cancer research, and pretty soon I was launched on The Last Trial, which centers on a cancer miracle cure.
So you love this character so much, you wrote a whole book just to save him.
Just to save his life. I was really ready to go back to Stern. And obviously, I found that I was writing about aging, which, having turned 70 during the writing of the novel, was very naturally a subject much on my mind.
Yeah. And talking of the research, it's one of the things that you do so well in the book. I've never dared write a legal thriller because I think it's very hard to explain the legal process and make it interesting. But you do that, but then you also throw in medicine, statistics, the FDA. How do you go about that? Do you have, I can only assume you plot very carefully and have people looking over your shoulder advising you when you're too deep into the weeds?
Well, certainly my editor will advise me when I'm too deep into the weeds, although I think, Mark, those were the hardest parts of the book for me to write. The stuff that should be hard was incredibly natural. I used to come out of this office and tell Adrian, there are days it feels like I'm taking dictation. But the technical stuff, whether about the law or clinical trials, securities laws, whatever it was, that, had to be written and rewritten in order to make it more and more condensed, and yet still intelligible to those readers who didn't just want to skip those parts. So.
Yeah, and just to say to whoever's watching this, as a lawyer, you'll know this yourself, Scott, that when you read a book that is set in a courtroom or has legal issues, it's very frustrating when something is wrong. But time and time again, it's just astounding to me how you incorporate everything that needs to be there and make it so interesting. It's just it's really well done. So everybody who's watching now, I can't recommend this book highly enough for that. It's fantastic.
Yeah. I think the one trick of it is that the technical stuff is always filtered through a character's perspectives. So even if it's an evidentiary ruling, and I bother to explain the rule of evidence, Stern or his daughter, who's his law partner, has a vested interest and is, either angry at the judge or ticked at the opponent. So there's some emotional content to all these explanations.
Yeah, and I was thinking about it today about how you do that and all the sort of complicated legal and pharmaceutical and regulatory aspects to the book. But the book isn't about that. And I read several reviews, all glowing, of course, but none of them touched on the fact that this book is very much about family.
Yeah.
That's something I kept thinking as I was reading it. It's like, this is really about family.
Stern's law partner is his daughter, and she is the child, one of his three children. She's the one with whom he clearly has the closest relationship. And his paralegal is his granddaughter. Yes, he's very bound up with his family. I mean, they literally practice law with him. So, and then his family stands in contrast to the family of the defendant, Kirill Pafko, who's been a friend of Stern's for 40 years. So it's also a family that Stern knows well, albeit a family with many secrets, one that's unraveling, not in an unusual development as the trial goes on. Criminal trials are very hard on families.
Yeah, well, we both know that. That's very true. One of the things I read maybe suggested that the next book might have Pinky as the
Yeah, Pinky is the granddaughter.
yeah.
And she sort of earns her bones as an investigator in the course of the last trial. So right now I am weighing and certainly writing the possibility of a book from Pinky's point of view. It's a little daunting, I mean, to try to write from the point of view of somebody who's, nearly 40 years younger than you are. And, I know the critics will be there with their knives sharpened, but I'm probably going to do it anyway.
I think you should, and for whatever my advice is worth. And one of the reasons for that is the other thing I noticed about this book in particular is all of the women are very strong women, even those who the mistresses who you might expect to be sort of arm candy, perhaps. They're all fairly ferocious, and I didn't know that was intentional.
They're strong. I mean, they're all. I mean, Pinky is really eccentric, but she's strong, and she doesn't get along too well with her aunt, Stern's daughter. They're always in each other's face, and Marta, the Stern's daughter, in some ways is the softest of the many women, because she's got sort of an enormous soft spot for her father. But she's tough too. Yeah, they're all strong women.
Yeah, and greatly admired by Sandy. And as I was reading his character, I was very conscious of thinking about my practice of law. I'm a prosecutor with the DA's office here in Austin, and you've been practicing for a long time. How many attorneys I've come across his age who are so much more cynical than he is. How's he hung on to his, is that your view of the law?
That being less cynical than,
yeah.
A man like Stern, who's been practicing law for 60 years, has got to find something redeeming in it, aside from the fact that it provides a good living. And, there are plenty of criminal defense lawyers and cops and prosecutors who have a very complex view of the world. Almost hard to articulate, but they're never surprised when somebody does the worst thing. Nor is Sandy. He's had enough clients lie to him, and enough clients be guilty of really bad things, that he's not shocked that there's negative capacity in human beings, but he does believe in the law. And, as you point out, it's about family, and, he's certainly finds plenty of redemption in the people he loves.
What does a man like that do, though, when he does retire? I mean, he seemed very accepting that he didn't have the energy to do this again, but it seemed like the doing it is what gave him energy. So that kind of made me wonder. I know it's the last trial, but maybe is it, or what does a man like that do in his retirement?
Well, I have to say that I do think there's a physical limit. I was told when I started as a prosecutor that, trying cases is a young person's game. And certainly, that's become more and more believable the older I get. So, will Stern totally give up the practice of law? I haven't decided that yet, but he is 85. The issue is he going to find something else, or is he just going to, wither up and go away? And he's withstood plenty of blows, so I tend to believe the former, but we'll see how he's doing in the next book. Yeah,
he doesn't seem like the withering away kind of sort of person, but I don't know. What about you? You're still practicing?
Little tiny bit. I'm a partner at a big, probably now the largest law firm in the world called Denton's, which has got these satellites everywhere, including 2,000 lawyers in China. And that I've actually been there since I left the U.S. Attorney's Office. It was called by a different name back then, but it's the same firm. And
What kind of work do you do?
I've been part-time since 1990. So, and my practice has dwindled over the years. Right now I have one paying case and one pro bono project. So that'll give you an idea of what I'm doing.
And that's criminal stuff, I presume?
Everything is criminally related. It happens to be the paying case is actually a civil case related to a criminal case. And I am on board for the criminal expertise.
Okay. We're both lawyers, both criminal lawyers, and I've noticed since I've been doing this that there are an awful lot of attorneys, a lot of criminal lawyers who become writers, and I've not figured out why that is. Do you have any idea?
Yes, I have ideas. And I think I'm given credit or blamed for a lot of different things, but I certainly in the last couple of generations opened the door to the idea of lawyers writing. And that's a pretty natural thing for them to be doing. Lawyers are fundamentally word people. I remember one of my law professors, and a revelation, as mentioned in 1L, he looked at the class and he said, well, come on, in the law, it's just words. And, you think about prisons and somebody's furniture being thrown out in the street. But for what lawyers do is conjure with words, whether it's writing briefs or parsing statutes, or arguing the meaning of cases. So they're intensely verbal people, and trial lawyers, as we both know, Mark, are natural storytellers. You don't survive very well if you can't tell a jury a story.
Yeah, I look for that in the book because I feel like at one point, maybe I was just projecting that's kind of what Sandy's, one of his points is that, you don't win a case unless you have a convincing story. If your story is better than the other person's story, then you win. And that's certainly true as a prosecutor. I know sometimes as a defense lawyer, it's a little harder to.
It's much harder, but.
Yeah, to come up with a story. But, I always tell people that jury trials are storytelling in theater.
Absolutely. And, certainly for the prosecutor, if you can't tell the story, if you can't tell a story about how something that your community regards as deeply wrong, you can't tell how that happened, you're in trouble. And generally speaking, most defense lawyers believe that just trying to nibble away at the prosecutor's story is not going to work. And you've got to have a story of your own. Even if the story is they haven't proved their case beyond a reasonable doubt, you got to have a narrative to that. There's a reason that they're misled, and they want to believe this, but this isn't true. So, but I remember when I went into private practice, somebody saying to me, a defense lawyer without a theory of defense is, up the creek without a paddle.
Yeah, I can't imagine going into trial without a theory would be a very smart move. I have a question from Charlie, who asks if Rusty Sabich will make a return in another book.
I don't know yet. When I finished Innocent, I certainly thought there was going to be a third Rusty book. But I have to admit, I'm not thinking about it yet. So we'll all find out with time.
Not thinking about it because you're busy with the release of this book, or
I have thoughts about where he went at the end of Innocent and what he's doing, and what another book could be, but I'm not curious enough about him yet to want to return to him, and so we'll see.
Yeah. Do you have, in the writing process, do you have cycles where you're writing or you're promoting or you're decompressing, or are you always working on something?
Well, I'm always working on something, but I'm working with different levels of intensity. In the last several years, in addition to writing a novel, I've always fooled around with something in Hollywood, whether it's a pilot script or a pitch for something. So that's like a sideline, and that's going on at the same time. But I've learned probably something you've learned too, Mark, which is you really want to have something else underway when the next book comes out, and it either keeps your pretty little head from being turned by the lovely reviews when that happens, or the slings and arrows when they're coming your way. Either way, every writer wants to believe that his or her best book is the one that she's writing now, and so when another book is underway, it dampens the response to the one that you finished.
I know there's a lot of aspiring writers who are watching this, and it's really interesting to hear you say that everyone believes the book they're working on now is going to be the best one and the biggest one. It's just kind of interesting that at the level you've attained, you still feel that way.
I was really happy with myself when I finished the last trial. I admit that. But you don't really know till you're done. But I do find, because what we do is so internal and private, that there is a long period of lying to yourself that goes on in writing a novel. And certainly when nobody else is looking at what you've written, you can believe it's stolen out of Shakespeare's crypt. So you come to terms, but there is the illusion always that it's wonderful.
Yeah, and the hope too. Yeah. So a question from Trisha, who asks, how does an author know when to retire a character and move on? I don't know how to answer that question. Having, as I said, I would be surprised if Sandy Stern returns as the centerpiece of another novel. It's not impossible. And in response to a number of questions, I've realized that I could certainly write about Stern in the past. I could do a novel set in 1963, and there would be Sandy Stern, Sure.
as a young man. I never wanted to write a series. I never wanted to write about the same person again and again. There are so many series somehow. I said the word series and my phone responded. So, and people do it so well. There's so many great series. But I always wanted to be writing about somebody else. So, and the only reason I've gone back to characters is because they're far enough along in their lives that they're in many ways different people.
Yeah, and with Sandy, it just seemed like you missed him. I mean, it just seemed like, I don't know. Is that?
I love Sandy Stern. There's no question about that. I think he's a good person. I think he's led a good life. And I think he's, a great tribute to the legal profession with his faith in the law.
Maybe he could be like a victim in a murder case.
Oh God! It would break my heart, Mark. I'd be in mourning for half the book.
He could die a noble death. There's no reason why.
And maybe he can take a bullet for a child.
There you go. Like there you go. So you mentioned dabbling with scripts and that sort of thing. What's on the horizon as far as any of your work being televised or filmed, or what's happening there?
There's a movement afoot to revive Presumed Innocent, and a lot of a lot of hissing and stroking going on in Hollywood, but I'm not allowed to say more than that. I'm pretty optimistic that that project will get off the ground. Some discussions about this book, although an 85-year-old is not Hollywood's favored demographic. But there are things to do. You know, we'll see. There's a reason I never moved to LA, and I like to keep my distance. It's fun, lots of talented people, but I'm a novelist.
And you're a long way from 85, so I'm not expecting any kind of retirement talk. But what are you doing for relaxing, for stepping away from the writing world?
Well, I mean, we're down in Florida, so I do play a lot of golf, and because my wife is pretty good, I sort of go out on the tennis court and let her beat my ears in. You know, I've always loved sports. I'm not a great athlete, but I've always loved playing them. So we play, you know, pickleball, although I'm not sure that's plague proof at the moment. So we don't do a lot of that right now. But you know, and then there are 5 grandchildren, so I miss them a lot, and usually they occupy a lot of our time.
Yeah. And are you getting involved in politics in any way? I saw that you've written one piece about the subpoenas.
Yeah.
I wasn't sure whether that was Scott Turow getting involved in politics or just sort of being informational because you're a lawyer.
Well, I try not to inflict my politics on readers, although obviously that's much less true of the novels than the opinion pieces. You don't have to go very far to find out that I'm, you know, what they called down in Texas years ago, a yellow dog Democrat, meaning that I would vote for a yellow dog if he was a Democrat. And without any, knowing that I am a yellow dog Democrat, you can imagine how upset I am at the moment. You know, I wish we were not at a time when the positions of the other party were so inciting to the people who are opposed, but that's where we are. And so I expect to be very active politically as the fall approaches.
Okay. Did you have worries about readers not liking that or don't care?
Well, as I said, I don't really, you know, inflict it in the novel. There's, you know, those who really want to get back into the weeds will go and read The Burden of Proof and find that Sandy Stern was a Republican, you know, and so his criticisms of the current president are reserved to, you know, a couple of sentences. Mm-hmm. You know, I really do believe what Daryl Zanuck, I think it was Zanuck, told one of his writers, you know, if you want to send a message, use Western Union. I found even when I was writing about the death penalty, that more than several years ago, but I wrote a novel about the death penalty, and I have opinions about it, but I didn't want to add them to the novel. The novel was Reversible Errors. And so after I was done with it, I wrote this nonfiction. I wrote a book, or I started out as an essay for the New Yorker about the death penalty. So yes, I have political opinions. Yes, they are expressed, and no, they are no secret. But I think people have every right to disagree with me without, you know, having, and without that spoiling their pleasure in reading a book.
Yeah, good. Got another question from the viewers. Pat asks if Sandy was based on a real person.
It's weird. I was always hesitant to answer that question in years past. Now that everybody is gone, it's easier for me to tell the truth, which is that my parents had a friend who was a Cuban immigrant. And like Stern, he was not a physically imposing person. He was very well kept, but nothing about him was particularly striking until he started speaking. And then he was so persuasive and so charming. Everything about him was engaging. And as I said, I got halfway through Presumed Innocent, and all of a sudden there was this trial, and Rusty needed a defense lawyer. And somehow the image of my parents' friend came to me as I was describing the defense lawyer. And the only thing, and my parents' friend was not a lawyer. So, affixing his characteristics to an attorney was my own invention. And the only thing about it I thought at the time was, I don't think I've seen a lawyer exactly like this, an Argentine immigrant, still with a little bit of an accent. I haven't seen a lot of that in fiction. So I thought I would go with it. And then, he just sort of stole the show.
Did he ever know that he was an inspiration for a character?
No, as I said, I was pretty cagey about answering that question while he was still alive, just because I wanted his family to be left in peace. I think I ultimately confessed that to his daughter several years ago, but I didn't know him very well. I have no idea whether his internal life was anything like Stern's. It's just the outward manner that I borrowed.
Do you find that you do generally base characters on people you know, or aspects of people you know?
Aspects, yeah. Very rarely, though, is even the beginning of a character wrested entirely from life. It was years probably before I remembered where Sandy had come from originally. I mean, if you ask me who was Rusty Savage, I can tell you where the idea of Rusty Savage came from, which was the guy I worked for in the Suffolk County DA's office, a man named Tim O'Neill. But Tim and Rusty have absolutely nothing in common. But Tim was a poet, and the idea of a character, of a narrator of a murder mystery having a more literate voice, that really came from Tim's background. But it wasn't Tim, and even Tim will tell you it's not me.
Yeah, I often use names of people I know, and even though I start with the image in my head, they will suddenly do something bizarre or mutate, and then I have to go back to the person and say, hey, actually, this person's a murderer. Do you want me to not use your name anymore?
Yeah. I got into that in Presumed Innocent. One of the guys I work with regularly, a postal inspector, begged me to put his name in the novel. And I did it, but he was kind of a schlep investigator, and not very good, and wasn't doing a good job. And I happened to show Ed the book, and before it was published, he was so upset. He did not see the humor in this one bit. And even though it was very late in the game, I had the name had to be changed in the plates. But we did it because he was, and I've never done it again. Never. For just that reason.
I have three people from my office. These are prosecutors, like the good guys, who begged me to be in the book, and they all wanted to be the bad guy.
Huh. Well, those are imaginative people. Ed would have been happy to be, the tall, good-looking fellow that he thinks he is. But the idea, and probably even if he was a tall, good-looking bad guy, he'd have been happy. But not some, overweight, slovenly, and ill-prepared investigator. That just didn't cut it.
Poor Ed. Well, John, do you want to hop back on? I think we've run over our 30 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if anybody else has questions.
Yeah. So can you guys hear me now?
Yes.
Quite
Okay.
well.
Thank you guys both so much for joining us. So if you guys are just tuning in, we've got Mark Pryor with us. He's the Hugo Marston series. The first book is The Bookseller. His character is he's a Texan who was head of I'm sorry, I can't talk anymore. Head of security for the US Embassy in Paris. They're big favorites at the stores. This is the first one. We've got it available, so definitely check those out. And of course, we've been talking with Scott Turow. His newest book, The Last Trial, is out. We've got signed copies available. I put up a link in the description so you can order those. There's not a specific signed book page on the website for it, but if you order it, you'll get a signed copy. So thank you guys both so much for joining us. Thank you to the group at Grand Central for helping us get this set up since we couldn't do it in store. If you guys are looking to order books, we are still closed to the public, but we're offering curbside pickup from 12 to 6 Mondays through Saturdays. You can give us a call at 713-524-8597. You can shoot us an email at order@murderbooks.com, or you can visit the website, which is murderbooks.com. We've got a lot more of these coming up next week. I'll be chatting with Laird Barron on Wednesday. Friday, we're doing an event with Michael Connelly and Greg Hurwitz at 12:30 in the afternoon. And then in the evening, McKenna is going to be chatting with Liv Constantine and Ivy Pachota. And then Saturday afternoon, we'll be talking with Alexander McCall Smith. So thank you guys both so much for joining us tonight. You guys take care, and we will see you soon.
Mark, thanks so much for doing this.